All right, everybody. I want to welcome you back. We started today international. We did the Israeli election with my friend David, and we're staying international, talking about Britain from the greatest British city in the world, Chicago, Illinois. Here's Sun Feiyang. How's it going?
Doing well. How about you?
Yeah, you might have to raise the volume, those of you watching, because Sun is at home and there's people sleeping at his house. So we can't just play around here. So the thing is, me and Sun, we probably, or Feiyang would be his proper name. I don't think we really agree on that many things, but I think that usually he kind of does great research on sources, especially pertaining to East Asia. But you seem to have like a particular affinity to issues of the European Union, Britain, and the upcoming trade imbroglio between them. So could you please explain what you think is going to happen? Will there be a Brexit deal at all? Because there's now talk of Theresa May bribing uh, basically members of parliament using money to constituencies in order to get them to vote for her plan.
So I saw that, but what I thought was going to happen was most likely an extension of Article 50, and not just a short-term one, which I know that the EU was not very favorably inclined to, but one of the longer extensions, potentially even through 2020. And that's what I originally thought was going to happen because I didn't think this deal had any shot. And I'm not sure if this, £2 million bribe that you linked is really going to make the difference. She has to win over quite a lot of labor supporters, many of which, actually just won a second referendum, which is now the official labor position. And of course, this her deal is still not winning over Rees-Mogg and the hardliners within her own party. So I'm not sure that it moves the needle enough to get her deal over the line. But she is going to make another attempt at it before the March deadline.
Right. So a lot of what Feiyang was talking about there was it's already been covered in some of my videos and a lot of other videos on YouTube. And British society is very divided, not just on Brexit, but as far as a lot of cultural issues right now, feminism, Islam, and freedom of speech. And what he's referencing, of course, is that a very large part of the Conservative Party base is dead set against any type of deal at this point, especially the Theresa May deal, because I believe it gives the European Union a lot of discretion as to being able to levy tariffs, and it essentially keeps them in the customs union. Um, and then, of course, you do have this schism that is affecting the Labour Party as far as these breakaway people who, you and I have both laughed at them over the past couple of weeks. The independent group, right? This people, the party that isn't a party because there's no fun. Well, what do you make of these people? I mean, I watch channels, channels I don't even agree with, and I think everybody can agree that these people are a joke. But what do you think is their long-term strategy?
I don't really think there is a long-term strategy. Shuka's been talking about doing this ever since Corbyn became the Labour leader, and he's only just got around to doing it now. They had quite a gaff-filled first day with I forgot her name, but was it Angela something?
Angela
The
Smith.
That's right, the MP who got involved in that funny tinge row. But I think the reason they're doing this is that for people like Shuka and his political alignment, there really isn't a future in the Labour Party for him under Corbyn. He wasn't going to become some sort of cabinet minister, even if Corbyn had won, an election. So there's really no future for him, and he might as well just try and make something else happen. Although they may not be popular, they still have a lot of big names backing like his group, Tony Blair for one. Um, yeah, like what's different about them and the Liberal Democrats? Like there's nothing distinctive about them, and I think they're just gonna hang around for a while and probably just kind of fade away. Like I don't really want to compare it to like what was Sharon's party called Kadima. It's gone now, right? But it had a brief moment in the sun. I think this will be even less important than that.
Yeah, I think like the difference there, and that's an interesting analogy, is that Ariel Sharon did have broad popular appeal at the time, and none of these people do. So that's
Exactly.
a yeah that's a fairly interesting comparison, and it was also I'm trying to think here in the U.S. we've had people who have said, well, we want to run in the center, but running in the center often means running for nothing. So it could be like this Howard Schultz thing that's going on. Um, Now, of course, you yourself, you personally, are not a great fan of the British as a country. If I'm, I think you're willing to admit that. But do you think that this would be healthy for the world trade system as it is? Do you think it would be beneficial to countries to be able to trade individually with the UK and then potentially with other EU member states that would leave the EU, or do you think it's better to trade with them as a bloc?
Oh, so it's great for everyone else. It's great for the United States as well. It's going to be bad for the UK, but
Hmm.
it's absolutely great for everyone else. And I think the United States is the best example of this. So our trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, who's been heading up the U.S. China negotiations. When asked about the UK, he said, our priority is all about opening up their agricultural markets. So uh, when the UK is part of the EU, there's a ban on chlorinated chicken for one, something that the US has always wanted to sell to the EU, and the EU prohibits that. And UK consumers don't necessarily want that either, but that's apparently going to be a precondition to any US UK deal. Like the US is going to use its leverage to force the UK to give up a lot of these tariffs and a lot of these regulations and bans that they had before. So, it's great for the US. It's a new market for us, but from the UK perspective, they've lost a lot of that leverage and negotiating power they had as a bloc. So, you know, um, definitely good for other countries who want more access to UK goods. They'll be able to get a lot of concessions, but it's hard to see how that's a plus for the UK on the trade front, especially since there's going to be a long delay on any of these trade deals. Like they take time to negotiate, and from Brexit to when these trade deals get negotiated and actually implemented, there's a lag there. And in that time, trade is going to suffer while these rules get hashed out. So definitely a lot of short-term pain, and I think even the pro-Brexiteers admit that, like that in the short term, while they hash these deals out, it's going to be quite unpleasant.
Okay, and then on the other side, however, so I follow a number of channels that deal with the turmoil in the EU. The channel I really follow that deals with France, for example, is Steve Turley, and he deals with France, Germany, Hungary, and the erosion of public confidence in the EU and in the pro EU politicians. So don't you think, or maybe you think otherwise, that this was inevitable, not just in the UK, which was already the most Eurosceptic country going into this whole saga, but Italy, for example, which is barely a united country as is, and then you have countries like Slovakia that have just gotten out of the shadow of communism, and the EU basically dictates from the top down. Or do you see this as kind of this destructive process is a passing phase in the EU?
Well, I think that I do agree that the EU has a lot of problems, but I think it's difficult to compare the UK situation to Italy or Slovakia. Like the power relationship that a lot of these smaller countries like Greece and Italy have with Germany and France is very different from what the UK has. Like the UK was used to be a pretty influential member in EU politics, and I really disagree with the characterization that Germany and France could really push the UK around. But Germany and France can push Greece around. They can push Italy around. And the power differential there, I understand, breeds a lot of resentment. But I think the UK largely benefited from the EU. Like maybe people didn't like seeing Polish immigrants around their towns, but from the economic sense, the UK benefited a lot, and it had the military power. It had like the economic clout to have a big say in setting a lot of these EU rules. And so, them leaving is an entirely different situation than a country like Greece or Slovakia, expressing discontent with the EU and wanting to leave. So, I think pretty different situations, though it definitely isn't good for the EU's long-term future.
Right, but what I keep hearing, and I hear it consistently, and I think it's obvious that most of these countries don't have a totally identical situation, but I've heard, for example, last year, or it was 2017, I think, I was interviewing people from Catalonia, and those were people who were pretty progressive, left wing people concerning the lack of real transparency in the EU and the fact that they don't really respect the voice of the citizenry. And it's the same type of thing I hear from people in every single EU state that interacts with either the channel or that I interact with through other media. It's almost as if the public confidence in the EU as an institution is falling apart due to the structure of the organization itself. They elect people to this body, but it doesn't really make any decisions. Many of the decisions are made by people who represent a permanent class within the EU. The parties that they represent almost never win a lot. So, would you say that you think that that institution is reformable, or is it doomed to failure?
Um, that's a pretty difficult question. I do think that there's an opportunity for reforms, whether they'll succeed or not. I can't really say. Um, I confess I'm not as familiar with how much popular support leaving the EU might have within each of those specific countries. But until they get like significant movement and more countries leaving the EU, then I think it's got enough inertia. It's a pretty good arrangement for a lot of people in these countries, especially if you have the means to move around. Like freedom of movement is great. It's great for the political class, and they, as long as they're able to redistribute the benefits of the EU to enough people in their country, like the EU is going to be around for a while. So it's it needs to reach the boiling point in a lot of different EU countries at around the same time for the EU to collapse, and that there's a lot of factors that have to work together for that to happen. So, I wouldn't be comfortable predicting that happening. Although, there are some warning signs for the EU, and hopefully that is a wake up call to Brussels. But like for now, it's nothing imminent.
Well, that's really, I think, where we disagree here, because when I saw, first of all, when Brexit was coming up, a lot of people were saying, well, the only people who will vote for this are old dumbasses who are kind of, they're used to listening to Slade and running around in their overalls in the coal mines or something. And, obviously the majority said otherwise in Britain. And then immediately afterward, I started like seeing similar rumblings in Italy. And in Italy last year, there was a massive landslide towards the nationalist and populist left side. And what I keep seeing more and more is that the European Union leaders seem tone deaf to the populists. They keep saying, well, there needs to be a greater rendition of powers to Brussels. We have to have more cooperation, more integration. And this is, now there's a massive anti-EU movement that's brewing in Spain, of all places. There's another one that's really taking charge over in Germany, the third party, which seems to be pushing the centrist Christian Democrats further to the right as well. So, I personally, I mean, you're right not to predict, but it doesn't seem like the future is bright for the European Union. Um, and I think personally, I work in an industry that's heavily regulated by the EU, and I think it'll affect a lot more people than we think. Here in the U.S., we don't really think of them as affecting us, but they do. Um, speaking as yourself, I mean, you're in a different sector than me. What would be like the ramifications of the Brexit deal on your sector, which would be finance, and on the greater world economy?
So there are very specific ramifications, and that's because Capital One does have a business in the UK. I can't really talk about like the specific
Well, you don't have to
operations
talk
there,
about your
but
organization, but
for finance in general, um, there are a lot of banks that are relocating some of their employees to Paris or to Hamburg or to Amsterdam, and that is, primarily people who work in sectors that largely deal with the EU. They would want those employees to stay in the EU, so they have moved some of that around. But um, overall, I think financial companies have had a lot of time to prepare. They're not going to be too impacted anymore now that the shock is worn off, and the people who have had to move have moved. London is still a major enough financial center, um, that they're always going to have a presence there. So I don't think anyone is too concerned right now. Like if there's something that's a major change, like a no deal Brexit at the end of March, which I think people are seeing as pretty unlikely now. Like there'll either be a deal or there'll be an extension. But barring something majorly unexpected, I think it's not going to have too much of an effect on our
Okay, so back to Britain for now. We're dealing with kind of a country that's divided in more ways than one, and Brexit is only one of them. So Theresa May did vow that she would donate, or I guess allocate 1.6 billion pounds more to the poorer areas of the UK, which I think most people in those areas are not going to buy into her tactics. They don't respect her anyway because she doesn't have much of a charisma for any sort of role. But you personally, you've talked a bit about, I think, offline with me about the ramifications for Ireland. And there's this article here that's showing that the EU, or sorry, the British Brexit minister is claiming that the European Union is using the border issue in order to block Brexit. What's your perception of this topic here? Because I know, for example, that you're very critical of British policy with regards to Ireland, Northern Ireland, and all of that. And now, of course, Brexit could cause a different border situation between the Republic and Northern Ireland.
So I read that article first because it's very interesting, and I think Dominic Raab even moderates his own stance toward the end. He said that the EU is just trying to preserve its own like customs union integrity, and he understands that. So I think the problem with Ireland is that the Tories are kind of trying to have their cake and eat it too. Like you either can respect the Good Friday Agreement and come to an agreement on the backstop, or you just give on them and there will be no deal. Like the EU needs to preserve a customs union, so there needs to be a hard border either in Ireland or there needs to be a border in the Irish Sea. Like you must have one or the other. So I think the EU has made that binary choice very clear to the UK, and the UK is trying to finagle something kind of in between, which is just impossible. Like either you're in the customs union or you're out, and you cannot have a deal in which we'll remain in the customs union for a while, but we reserve the right to pull out of it unilaterally, because then that's not really an agreement. So I think there are always going to have to be tough choices made by the UK over Ireland, over Brexit, and that's really on them to do. Like the EU's position, I think, is pretty clear. But I'm curious to see what your take is on it and what your proposed solution would be there.
Yeah, I don't think that the Good Friday Agreement. Now, from what I'm understanding, it's part of the terms is that there will be no hard border between the two realms. That's correct.
Yes.
So, in my opinion, the way Brexit's been done, it's putting the cart before the horse. As of right now, Ireland is a very amenable country to being part of the EU. So whatever final status will be gained through Brexit, if they put on a hard border, what you're saying is it would break the Good Friday Agreement. It could cause extra friction on the border, but I don't know that the Irish public would be wanting to go back to, volatile times of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the troubles. Of course, it could be that this is definitely this could be the powder keg or the match that lights the powder keg that's been waiting for several years. I mean, it's not like the Good Friday Agreement solved the communal troubles in the six counties, but you know, I think that people thinking that this is going to stop Brexit are kind of deluding themselves because, like, the way I look
Well,
at
I
this,
think.
what's that?
Oh, go on.
Yeah, so there are people who do think that. I'm not saying that all the people who observe this problem think that way, but there's people who say, well, Scotland leaving the UK, that would torpedo it because they thought that Scotland would be welcomed into the EU. Well, that didn't happen. And what we're seeing now is that all these people who are saying, well, we have to, people didn't understand the vote and we don't, we can't leave the EU, we can't survive without the EU. The more people that I talk to from, Germany and Italy and those countries, the more it seems like there might not be an EU to leave in a few years. So, the Irish, I think they're one of the big stones that is holding the EU together because they could have like a credible dependency on it, given that they're kind of out there in the middle of the Atlantic, and they depend a little bit more on commerce with the continent. But long term, I don't know if they're really going to be able to hold it together because the main components, of course, France and the Eastern European countries, they just don't have any common purpose together.
Yeah, there may be a few people who think Ireland can stop Brexit, but I don't think that's been a primary consideration for some time. Right now, I think the EU has kind of figured out that, hey, it's going to happen, and we just need to make our principles clear on the status of Ireland and Brexit. So I honestly think this is a compromise that the Tories would have accepted had it not been for the DUP propping up the government. But if you give Northern Ireland a special status, you have the customs border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, you can preserve the Good Friday Agreement, you can leave the EU, and then Scotland, Wales, England, they have their own set of customs rules, and you just have customs checks at the sea there. That would have been perfectly acceptable to Theresa May. You think they care about Northern Ireland? They don't. But her government is being held up by the DUP, and the DUP's firm stance is that Northern Ireland cannot be treated differently than the rest of the UK. Like, they don't care about Northern Ireland. They send Belfast a couple of £1 million every election year, and then they can count on the DUP support, and that's it. Like, Northern Ireland has fallen way behind the rest of Ireland, in the last couple of decades, and it's just due to chronic underinvestment. Like, it's not an area of focus for any of the ruling parties in the UK. Like, Sinn Féin doesn't even take their seats in Westminster, so it's really just the DUP, and they just stick with the Tories. So it's not really been Labour's area of focus either. Labour doesn't run candidates in 6 counties, so sum total of that is that Northern Ireland is pretty dependent on the South right now, and it. I think that would have been a solution that would have worked for all sides, but it doesn't seem feasible right now, with the DUP in the situation that they are. So
Right, and I think again you can blame Theresa May for that. She ran a horrible
for calling that
campaign.
election, yeah,
Yeah, she might be one of the worst politicians of all time because going into that election, the conservatives were heavily favored, and she decided not to debate, not to really engage the voters. She revived the stupid fox hunting issue that nobody cares about except for people that don't like fox hunting. And she was probably, I mean, I think she even hired that twit that was Hillary Clinton's communications director. So yeah, I think she's to blame for that, and they really underperformed. And I think with Theresa May, you're seeing Britain being managed the way Hillary Clinton would have managed the USA if she was president. It's kind of it is a disgrace. Even I'm certainly more sympathetic to the British than you are, but I think that you wouldn't want Theresa May running your country either. It doesn't matter what country you're from.
absolutely not.
So onto that issue. So Jeremy Corbyn, he is a lightning rod for the headlines. He's always discussed, even here, he's discussed a lot concerning the anti-Semitism issue. Now, you do post some memes about him, but do you think that his chances of becoming prime minister are going to increase now that we're entering this critical period of Brexit? Or is he now he did commit to the second referendum and it pissed off some Labour voters. So where do you think his next move is going to be?
No, and I don't think he should want to be prime minister right now. Like, if he takes over right now, then Labour becomes responsible for Brexit, and I know it's going to turn out poorly given like just where we are right now. Unless you have a long extension and a long time to work something out, like there's just not enough time to work out an orderly Brexit. So they shouldn't be trying to win right now. They should let the Conservatives own Brexit. They should let the Conservatives own the fallout, and then you can come to power and then say, hey, we're here to clean up the Tories' mess. I I I don't think he's like he is going through the motions somewhat because he does have to look like he's trying, but I don't think they're that intent on winning becoming prime minister all that soon. Not until all this is sorted out.
Right, and I think most of the viewers today are Americans, so to explain the situation, Jeremy Corbyn, regardless of I personally probably couldn't stand him because he's communist and whatever, but like his entire career he was an anti-EU person. He was very skeptical of the union and he believed that it would weaken workers' rights, which he was probably right about that. You have to hand it to him. And essentially, once he became labor leader, he had to confront the situation where the majority of labor members of parliament are pro EU. A lot of the party's youth is pro EU. They were voting for Remain. A lot of the party's working class base are anti EU. So you can only, it's almost like the fight between the neoconservatives and the populists here in the U.S. You have two completely divergent attitudes within the same party in the Republican Party. So, I think it's, I don't like him. I can appreciate the situation he's in. And I can appreciate the fact that some of these people, I mean, this Chucko Umuna guy, he really is, he's all about saying that the people don't know what they want, and then the people keep rejecting him. So maybe everybody knows what they want, and he's the only one who doesn't. So that's my impression of some of these labor rebels, and I think they did the right thing by leaving, but now they have to say, well, we want a new people's vote, but we're not going to stand for our own re-election in a by-election, which a lot of times this happens when a new parliamentary group splits up. So I think we could probably wrap up now. So what else, Feiyang? Do you have any last words about Brexit, about Jeremy Corbyn, maybe about the White Sox upcoming season?
Well, I'm very upset they didn't sign Machado. That's feel like that was a pretty good opportunity for a team which could contend, which has a solid young talent base. But I just it was a bizarre free agency for baseball in general.
Yeah, where he ended up in San Diego or something.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And as for Brexit, I don't know. I think we'll find out very soon if there's going to be an extension or not, like in 2 weeks or so. And if there's not an extension, then I think there's going to be no deal, which would be surprising to me right now. Right now, I expect an extension, even if like the EU was trying to play hardball over that. I definitely think there'll be an extension of some sort for them to work out the deal.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of, maybe I'm more optimistic than you. I think that the EU and the British economy will, I mean, I think the British economy will adapt a little better than the EU economy because the EU has a lot of more moving parts to deal with, given it has more member states. But I want to thank you for coming on again, especially because I know you usually have to come on late and when the family's asleep. So thanks again, and I hope to have you on soon again with a certain friend of ours who's been angling at you. That should be pretty fun. All right,
Trying
man.
to make that work. Thanks.
Take it easy. Have a good night. All right, thank you guys. This is Bold Like a Leopard with Sun Feiyang. And please like, share, subscribe. And also, please subscribe to me on BitChute and all the other social media that is already in the comments